we need you to work on that for us and really help us out. And when you bring them back, well, those will be cut out, and they'll be take some of those home and help us out with getting ready for Vacation Bible School. And it's coming up June 6th. We're excited about it. And like you said, we'll have another meeting this afternoon just to kind of touch base and see where we are on things and kind of which direction we need to take as far as some of those areas goes. But I want to say, kind of let you know what's coming up in the next few weeks as far as the sermons. So the next 2 Sunday nights, including tonight, we're going to have 2 lessons on gratitude. Then we're going to have 2 lessons on kind of getting ready for VBS on before the flood. So kind of getting our minds on what's going on earth and with God and with His people before the flood happens. And then we'll be ready for Vacation Bible School when it comes. Today, we're going to start a lesson that's going to take about 4 Sunday mornings. And because there's several topics I want to discuss, but they all kind of lead up to the same thing. And so that's what we'll be talking about. I want to mention again, Wednesday night, we're starting a class on Wednesday night about Christianity from the time of Jesus up to Constantine and Emperor Constantine and what he did to Christianity or for Christianity or however it's seen. But those years, we're going to kind of study the history of that and how some of the things that started then we're still dealing with now. And kind of compare those and see if we need to be still doing some of those things or not. And so it's going to be a good study, I think, and your discussion and your input is going to be helpful in that too. So if you want to come be a part of that on Wednesday night, we'll have fun with that. And with all that said, now I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. It's just absolutely amazing all that you do, and I know it's very, very much you are not nearly appreciated, moms, as you should be, because most of the stuff you do is never seen by many people at all. But thank you, mothers, for all that you do and for who you are, and just know that God knows who you are. God knows all that you're doing, even if we don't see it all the time. God knows. And so thank you, mothers, for being who you are. And I want to say that my mom's here today. Say happy Mother's Day to my mother. I thought about putting a picture up on the board of how she dressed me when I was younger. Because it was one of those cute little outfits that's a onesie with a big collar, and I had blonde hair with kind of ringlets in it. And this is a running joke in our family, and I'm the one that keeps it running. All right, nobody else does. It kind of I need some treatment for this. So if anybody can help me through this, the rest of my life trying to be not that person. I'm just kidding. My mom's a great mom, but she dressed me cute like that, and she took care of me very well. And that's the thing that we always laugh about. I always bring that up, but she's a really good mom to me, and I appreciate them coming over here to be with us today. And so I want to kind of start that out today. Is what we're going to talk about is following Jesus, and why I read for us the scripture that I mentioned Wednesday night, and that's kind of leading up to what we're going to talk about following Jesus, because I think many times we have maybe an understanding of what it means to follow Jesus. Maybe we're confused about it, and maybe if we did understand it, we might not want to do it. Now, I know that sounds strange, but this is going to take, like I said, 4 weeks to talk about. And so I'm going to go through what we're going to be talking about, the topics we will be talking about over the next 3 weeks after this one. This one will be kind of a main introduction to the whole thing. We're going to start out in Matthew chapter 15. Matthew 15, and then we'll jump over to Matthew 16. That's all we'll be today. So you can kind of keep it open to that same page if you want to. And I think they'll be on the screen here in just a minute. But we're going to start out in Matthew 15, and I'm going to read 1 through 20, and I'm going to stop a few times and kind of discuss a few of those things. So Matthew chapter 15, starting in verse 1, says this. Then some Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." And he answered and said to them, "Why do you yourselves transgress the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and he who speaks evil of father or mother to be put to death is to be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, 'Whatever I have that would help you has been given to God. He is not to honor his father or his mother. And by this you invalidated the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Now I'll stop right there and just explain a few things, and then we'll start back in verse 10. But, all right, kids, I want to ask you, how many times have you heard from your mom, wash your hands? Probably a lot. You hear from your mom a lot, go brush your teeth, make sure the hygiene stuff. But you hear it a lot when you come in to eat. And I know when you're really young, you can come in from playing in the dirt and just start fixing a sandwich. And you don't even think about it. And so usually, the mom's there to say, hey, wash your hands. The dad, he may do the same thing with the dirt, and the mom has to say to dad, wash your hands too. Because usually we don't remember that. But moms are always there to say, wash your hands. And so that seems to make sense. So why is Jesus teaching his people not to wash their hands? That sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? I bet Jesus' mother got him to wash his hands. And so I want us to see, and kids, I want you to understand, Jesus is not teaching contrary to what your mom is teaching you. We should wash our hands before we eat. It's a good thing to do. But what Jesus is doing is calling out something that's being done as far as what the heart of the teaching is about. And so we're going to talk about this just for a few minutes before we lead into what those topics are going to be coming up the next few weeks. But I want us to see the Pharisees and the scribes, they were questioning Jesus' followers because they did not wash their hands before they eat the bread. So what that means is there was ceremonial washings that the Pharisees had in place, and every time they were to eat or to do certain of those things, they would wash their cups, they would wash their hands. They had ceremonial washings that was always to go along with those things. So where did that come from? Well, it kind of derives from the law of the Old Testament, where the priests are supposed to go through ceremonial washing before they do stuff in the temple. But over years, layers and layers and layers has been added to that teaching so that they will make sure they follow that teaching. And part of those layers has come to now they're all supposed to do a ceremonial washing before they even eat. Now, there's a big lesson in there that we need to go back and revisit this just to talk about that. When Jesus follows up and says that they teach as doctrine the precepts of men. That's not what we're going to talk about today, but that's the heart of what's going on right here. They're teaching this is the law, when actually what that is layers they've added up to make sure people follow the law. And years and years and years of this is added up to now these Pharisees have all of these what's called precepts or rules. They have all these rules, and that has become just as important as the actual law. And anybody that goes against their rules, in their mind, is going against the law. So Jesus calls them out on this, because they called his followers out. Why don't they do this? They're going against the tradition of the elders. Isn't that something? And can't we be made to feel guilty of that sometimes? If you ever try to go against or do not agree with what somebody else thinks, or maybe with what your grandparents or great-grandparents thought, you're going against what they thought. How can you ever do that? That's what they're saying right here. How can you go against the tradition of the elders? Well, Jesus calls them on this. So this is not about, like I said, not washing your hands before you make a sandwich. What Jesus is calling them out here to say is that you're teaching as law what is not law. It's your rules. And my followers are not going to follow your rules. And so, in understanding this, Jesus goes on to say something else to them. So he says, after Jesus, this is verse 10, after Jesus called the crowd to him, he said to them, hear and understand. It is not what enters the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth that defiles the man. Then the disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this statement? But he answered and said, every plant which is which my heavenly Father did not plant, shall be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into a pit. Now, there's some very interesting teaching going on right here. So Jesus says, if you eat with dirty hands, and that goes, you eat a sandwich, you have dirty hands, eat the bread that goes in, that does not defile the man. Okay? It may make you sick, but that doesn't defile the man. What defiles the man is what comes out of the man, because that comes from right here. So what Jesus is saying here is, this is what's about in your heart. That's the man you're going to be. It's not about some washing, physical washing of the hands that's going to make you who you are. And so he's calling them out on this. And isn't it interesting, when the disciples came to him and said, did you know that the Pharisees were offended when you said this? Like, that's a big thing to offend the Pharisees. It was a big deal. And the Pharisees object. What they want to do here is they want to discredit Jesus. Jesus has a following, and they want to keep discrediting him so that they can just kind of do away with his following. And that's what they're trying to do. And Jesus calls on them. He even says, you make these precepts, all right, we're supposed to honor our father and mother. Well, what you say is, well, I would honor them, I would help them, I would take care of them, but the money I would have used to take care of them, I've already given that to God. So I can't take care of my mom and dad. Doesn't that sound absurd? But that's what they're doing. Jesus calls them on that. He says, you don't even take care of your mom and dad because you said, what I would have used, it's Corbin. It's a gift to God. So now I don't have enough money to take care of them while they're aging. And Jesus says, you completely missed the point. So when Jesus is teaching this, the disciples come up and say, you offended the Pharisees. Now here's how Jesus responds. He tells them this story. Every plant that my Father has planted, it's going to be uprooted. So leave those guys alone. It's like blind people leading blind people, and they're all going to fall into a pit. Then Jesus says this, verse 15. Peter said to him, explain the parable to us. Jesus said, are you still lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes through the stomach and is eliminated? But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, slanders. These are the things which defile the man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man. Again, kids, not saying you don't go home and wash your hands before you eat lunch today. But Jesus is saying there is something so much more than following a ceremonial washing of hands. It's actually who you are. That's what Jesus is saying. And he knows there's two things going on with these people. There's the Pharisees. They don't get it. They don't get Jesus. And here's the point. They don't want to. They don't want to understand Jesus. They just want to get rid of him. But then there's Jesus' followers. They don't get Jesus either. You see, they don't understand what Jesus is saying, but they want to. So you got two groups here. One group, the Pharisees, they don't understand it and they don't want to. And then the disciples, they don't understand it, but they want to. They're staying with Jesus. Notice that they're surprised that Jesus says something that would offend the Pharisees. Then they say, explain to us what you just said. They're trying to understand Jesus when Jesus is going against the culture that they all know. Because he's trying to get at something that they just don't understand yet. That is going to lead us to what we're about to talk about in Matthew chapter 16. Because what Jesus is about to say in Matthew 16, we can probably be divided into two categories about what Jesus is about to say. Some of us probably don't understand. I may go so far as to say all of us probably don't really get what Jesus said. Kind of what Matt mentioned in our class today when he talked about the persecution. Some people that have decided to follow Christ and then been kicked out of their house, kicked out of their community, or shunned, or killed, or beaten, which all still goes on today in different places of the world, they get a little bit more of what Jesus is saying. We don't get it a lot. In fact, we like to spiritualize it lots of times and just say, well, it means this for us, and not really actually see what he's saying to these people. So what Jesus is about to say, and we're about to read it, there's two groups. There's a group that probably want to understand it, but we might not yet, and I would say hopefully that's us. But then there's a group that doesn't want to understand it. They don't want that kind of Jesus. They want a Jesus that's going to allow for them to have a nice, comfortable life, but not one that's going to lead you to a cross. So they don't really want to understand it. I want to ask you, as we go through this study, where are you at? Do you want to follow Jesus, whatever it costs? And do you truly want to understand what that means? And here's how I want to ask that question, because here's how it makes sense to me. So all you moms out there, would you teach your kids to follow Jesus? And I mentioned this Wednesday night, but would you teach your kids to follow Jesus? Almost every mother here today would say yes. Would you teach your kids to follow Jesus to the cross? That's a different question. So yes, I would teach my children to follow Jesus. But would you teach your children to follow Jesus to the cross? Because that's what he's asking. And that's a different question. We separate the two. Follow Jesus just means being good and going to church and doing those things. So yes, I'll teach my kids to follow Jesus. That's not what Jesus had asked. We're going to end up in 4 weeks on that very thing of what Jesus is asking. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about some of the things that we kind of understand a little bit more about following Jesus, but that it actually does go another level to actually do what he says. So I'm going to mention these things that we are going to talk about. And these things, I think, are things that most mothers would teach their children. And when I call these out, you just kind of ask yourself if you think that. And we're going to talk about these things, like I said, over the next 2 weeks. Then the third week, we're going to end up with what he actually said about following him at the cross. But here's the things we're going to talk about. So following Jesus, what does that mean? I think for us, in a very easy understanding of following Jesus for our culture, for our life right now, one of the things would be taking care of and loving and serving each other. So following Jesus, taking care of and loving and serving each other. That's a big part of what it is to follow Jesus. And we're going to talk about that in depth next week, because that takes time. It takes time from your life if you're loving and serving and taking care of someone else and what's going on in their life. It takes awareness. It takes awareness of knowing what's going on in other people's lives. And it takes a genuine care for the other people. So this isn't just like a rule. Okay, I'm supposed to love each other, so now I got to do that. How do I do that? Oh, I need to go take some food to that person. It's not a rule that you follow to go to heaven. It's a sincere care for the people sitting around you. Like you truly want to see the people around you helped and served, and whatever they need, you want to see their needs met. And the early church did that. We're going to see what great lengths they went to do to see that all the needs were met of their family. I mean, their church family. It's absolutely amazing. And so with that, I will say, and I've mentioned it before, that's one of the things this group of people right here, it's your gift. I mean, God has given you this gift to take care of each other. And it is absolutely amazing. And when Lindsay and I found out we might have the opportunity to come back and be with you, that's one of the things that we said, it's just a group of people that love each other and they care for each other. We were so excited about being back a part of it. So I want to go ahead and commend you. But I want us to see a little bit more maybe of what that means. But you take good care of each other. That's one of the things it means in following Jesus. But also along with following Jesus, in taking care of each other, we're going to talk about this, that goes with that same point. You also have to put a few boundaries in there. And what I mean by that is, if you end up saying yes to every opportunity and everything, we got to remember, when we say yes to things, we're saying no to other things. That's one of the things that's been kind of difficult for me and Lindsay in moving back here from Colorado. Where we lived in Colorado was a really small town, and if you're going to go do something in another town, it was at least a 60-mile drive, and it was going to be over a big mountain or through a big canyon. And so usually, you just didn't go do things at night. You just stayed home. And so we kind of got used to that after work, you're just going to go home, and you're going to be at home. We even started eating supper at 4:30 sometimes, and it was nice. We would just eat at 4:30, and it was be there with the family. And we got used to that. When we moved back here, there was something to do or somewhere to go every night. And so I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying we're having a hard time getting back used to that when we were used to just being there. So I will say this along with that point. In making sure we take care of people and love people, you've also got to remember you're a family. And you got to have family time. Sometimes you may have to say no to something to make sure you're a family. And that's going to lead to one of the other things that we're going to talk about. But number two, so the first one is taking care of and loving and serving each other. Number two that goes along with that, getting along with each other. That's one of the things it means to follow Jesus. Actually getting along with each other. Now when I say that, many of you in here might be saying, well, I understand that. I don't really know why we need to talk about it, but I do understand that. Because for the most part, we get along with each other. But I will say, as it is with any group of people, there are differences. There are differences in ideas. There are differences even in beliefs. And we're called to get along with each other. We're called to be united. And there is one thought of unity, that unity means that everybody agrees. And that is not true. And if you would disagree with me on that, I would ask you, anybody that's in here that's married, do you and your husband or you and your wife agree on everything? No. Are you one? Yes. Unity does not always mean you agree on everything, but it means you know that above all else, we are one. And that's who we're called to be as a church. We are unified. We get along with each other. So a subtopic I have under that is, to help us understand it, how do Jews and Gentiles sit down and eat supper together? I want us to see how big of a deal that would have been in that time for a Jew and a Gentile to sit down and eat and share a meal. That was the first century church. And it's absolutely amazing. And some people would have seen them doing that and said, wow, I want a part of that. Some would have seen that and said, I'm repulsed on both sides, Jews and Gentiles. They would have said, how in the world can they do that? And it would have driven them away. But that's the first century church. It's completely different world mindsets coming together to share a meal. And it's absolutely amazing. So how do we get along with each other? We need to learn to thrive in an atmosphere where we're with different people. People that are just not our people. People that may not vote the way you vote. People that may not do the same things you do on Friday night. We need to learn to get along with each other. And so that's part of this understanding. Because I guarantee you the Jews and the Gentiles would have been doing different things on Friday night. They would have voted for different people if they got to vote. They would have done different things, but they all came together. Number three, just being good people. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? Number one, taking care of and loving and serving each other. Number two, getting along with each other. Number three, just being, in quotes, good people. What do I mean by that? So being the husband and wives that we're supposed to be as Christ followers. It's a lot different. The definition of a Christ follower as a husband and wife is different than what the world sees as a husband and wife. A mom and a dad. What does it mean to be a Christ follower as a mom and a dad? What does it mean to be a Christ follower as children? How can you be a Christ follower and be a good sister or be a good brother? How can you be a good Christ follower and be a good employee? Or be a good co-worker? or just be a good friend in your community to people that you don't go to church with? What does it mean to follow Jesus in those very applicable parts of your life where you are day in and day out? What does it mean to just be good people? We're going to talk about that one. And then number 4, this is a hard one, but this is the step that gets to the hardest one, which is going to be number 5. Joyfully enduring the hardships that happen to everyone. And many times in Scripture, this is where the divider comes in, of where I'm not sure we would teach our children, or we would want to teach our children to follow Jesus all the way. We would teach them this, I think. Joyfully endure the hardships that happen to everyone. So all of us, whether we're Christ followers or not, we live in a broken world. We all go through sickness or have loved ones that go through sickness. We all are going to face death or have loved ones that are facing death, or we lose loved ones. We all have financial struggles from time to time. We all have things that happen to us, Christ followers or not. Hardships happen because we all live in a broken world. The difference is how we face those hardships. So a true follower of Christ can see a sickness or a death of a loved one or financial trouble. They can see those things differently than the world does. We can actually go through those things joyfully enduring those things. That's hard. But we know that's what we're called to do. So those are the things we're going to talk about over the next 2 weeks. And it's all leading up to number 5. And that's what we're going to end with today. Number 5, and that's with following Jesus to the cross. So we all understand we're supposed to follow Jesus. I just wonder if we all really understand what that means. Part of it means those 4 things I just listed. And we're going to see those and look into those in depth. But the next one is where I think we might, like I said, all of us, we might just miss it a little bit. We might be like his disciples, saying, please explain this to us. We want to get it. We really want to get it. But you're going to have to explain it to us a little more. So that's Matthew 15. Not far after that is Matthew 16, where Jesus is explaining something to his disciples again that they don't understand. And we'll see that. But we're going to start reading in Matthew chapter 16. We're going to read starting in verse 24. Matthew 16, 24. It says this. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So we read this and we understand it maybe, or we, like I said, we kind of spiritualize it sometimes. And it makes sense to us in kind of a metaphorical kind of way where we know we're supposed to really lose our life. Physically, it doesn't really take anything from us. Or we might even say, if I was ever put in that position, I know that's who I'm supposed to be, but I'm not. I'm not in that position. But if I ever was, that's who I'm supposed to be. So this is where it gets hard. This is where we understand that the joyfully enduring hardship differs from the one I just said. See, there's hardship that all of us are going to face. And then there's hardship and suffering that comes just from following Jesus. So as Jesus is on the way to Jerusalem, he starts telling them about what's going to happen. Part of this is he says that you must take up your cross and follow him. And as I mentioned Wednesday night, it would have, like, alarm went off in their head when he said, take up your cross and follow me. They knew what that meant. They didn't know Jesus was about to go through it, but they knew what that meant. And to help us see this a little more clearly, we're going to skip back up and see what was said right before this part. So let's skip back up. So this is Matthew 16. Skip back up to verse 21. And we're going to read there. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised up on the third day. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. Now, this is where I think this fits in with Mother's Day. Because if anything bad was going to happen to a child, I think the mother would have the same attitude that Peter has here. God forbid it. I never want that to happen to you. Nothing bad should ever happen to you. And as Jesus is trying to explain to them something they do not understand, Peter goes so far as to say to Jesus, God forbid it. Have you ever stopped to think about the irony of that? To Jesus, who is God in flesh, he says, God forbid it. He's way confused. And he says, this should never happen to you. Does that not show that Peter does not know what's coming and what God and Jesus are all about? Anything else? Peter says, this should never happen to you. And Jesus' answer is where I think it should hit every one of us right here. The reason you're saying this, Peter, is because your interests are on what seems best for man, not for God. And that's where the following Jesus, this is where it's hard for us. Because we all want to say, I want to follow Jesus, but when it gets to the point where following Jesus is not best for man, it's with God's interest, that's where it gets hard. And Jesus goes on to say, you're going to have to carry a cross if you're going to follow me. So I want to say this in closing. Moms everywhere, especially here, I bet you would easily say, I would die for my kids. Like, it wouldn't even be a thought. If I had to choose, I would die for my children. Any mom in here would say that. And so if you would say yes to that, I would have to say, why? Why would you die for your children? I think the answer is love. I'm sure it's a lot more that goes in with that, but the answer is love. And if you can understand that answer, can we understand why Jesus says his followers are to die for him? It's that love. Jesus' followers are supposed to love him and follow him. I mean, we have to ask the question, moms, if you would die for your children because you know they're worth it, will we teach our children to die for Jesus because he is definitely worth it? But we have our, and I get it, I understand it because I'm a parent too, but we have our interest on man's interest, not God's interest. And sometimes God's interest leads us to a cross, not just for what's good. So I want to end with this story. Many of you know the athlete Tim Tebow, and we got to go hear him speak one time. And pretty good. And he was a good speaker, and we got to hear a lot of neat things. But he got to tell a lot more of his story there. And so many of you may know his story, or you may just know him from playing football. But you know that he actually is a man of faith, and he showed that publicly, and he was ridiculed for it quite often. In fact, when he went to play pro, and I think this was in New York, he was still, saying, I'm going to be pure until I'm married. And he wasn't just like bragging about it. He was just saying, that's who I'm going to be. That's who I'm supposed to be. So he was saying, I'm going to be pure until I'm married. Well, a radio host even challenged the ladies in New York to make him not live up to that promise. I mean, is that not just sick? He was challenging them to make him not live up on his promise to be pure until he was married. That's what the world is doing many times to people who put their faith out there publicly. And so Tim's story is pretty amazing. He was born in the Philippines because his parents were missionaries. And so they already had 3, maybe 4 children, and now his mom got pregnant with him. But his mom, living in the Philippines as a missionary, had a sickness. And with that sickness, she had to take certain medicines. Well, she was still taking those medicines before she found out she was pregnant. And so the doctors told her, the medicine that you've taken has severely damaged the fetus, and you're going to have to stop those medicines if you're going to keep the baby. But it's probably already done some damage. So the doctors told Tim Tebow's mom, here's what you need to do. Have an abortion, get back on your medicines, and save your life. That's what you need to do. They encouraged her to do that the whole pregnancy. The mom, Tim's mom, stopped taking medicines, obviously didn't have an abortion, and they just prayed. Tim's dad even said, his dad even said this prayer, God, if you'll bless me with this son, I'll make him into a preacher. Now I want you to think, because we might say real quick, well, he's not a preacher. He's had so much more of a platform than many of us preachers has ever had to share Christ to the world. In fact, one story he said, so they were on the mission field, and he was in this big, I think it was a tent. They had a big tent set up, and he was speaking to the people in the Philippines. And lots of people were in the tent. When he got up to speak, so he's a teenager at this time, when he got up to speak, he noticed 4 boys about his age leave out of the back. And he's wondering, why did they leave? So he spoke, and then after it, he went out and found those 4 boys. They had kind of gone off into a home over here. He went looking for them. Well, they ran out and found him and said, come here. So he went over to the house, and they pointed in the house, and it was like a really small door that you had to get down on your knees and crawl into. There was a boy about their age in there, and he couldn't walk. His legs were messed up. And so they just pointed to him. I guess they just wanted to show Tim that guy. That guy with his legs messed up, their culture looked down on him. Lots like the culture that we read about in Scripture. They thought that somebody had sinned or somebody messed up, and that guy was unclean. And you weren't really supposed to hang out with that kid. So this is a teenage boy that has been shunned by his group of people because there's something wrong with him all his life. And so after that, Tim's parents, everybody actually started looking for him. So they got now lots of people, they don't know where Tim Tebow is, so they all kind of start looking. Well, they all kind of gravitate over when they find out he's there. But what Tim did was, all right, I'll get through this, but it kind of gets to him. He got down and he crawled into the house and he pulled the boy out. He picked that boy up in his arms and just walked him out into the village. Now, this is a boy that the people in the village shunned. And you're not supposed to touch these young people. He picked him up, just walked him out in the village. And when he did this, something happened. These Americans that are here teaching us about Jesus, he accepts this boy. Maybe we should too. And they all kind of crowded around and they all started accepting that boy. And they all touched him. Didn't they? Think about this. This mom was willing to give her life because the doctors told her, you may very well die if you don't have this abortion. She was willing to give her life for her son. And she would have gladly accepted that. This is not a story about if you ever do that, it's always going to turn out great and you'll have a really good athlete son. That's not the story. The story is she was willing to do that no matter what. And what God did with it, when his dad said, I'll make him a preacher, he turned him into somebody that has so much more of a platform than many preachers. And even that story alone helps us see the influence he's had on the world for Jesus. So when we're trying to understand following Jesus to the cross, that means following him to death. I want us as Christians to understand what that means. You see, it means that we're going to take care of each other and love each other and serve each other. And it means that we are going to get along with each other as a follower of Christ. And it means that we're going to be good people, good husbands and wives, and it means that we're going to endure hardship joyfully. But it means so much more than that when Jesus says, take up your cross. It means now there's going to be things that are not going to turn out good for you. It's not just a hardship that hits you because it hits everybody. It's a hardship that's going to hit you because you're a follower of me. Are you willing to do that? That's what we're going to talk about at the end of this series. As we lead all the way through that and end up being a follower of Christ, and we have to decide, do I really want to understand what that means? Or does that scare me away from Jesus? That's the challenge I want to give you. Be praying about this and be looking into it as we talk about these things in more detail leading up to that, following Jesus to the cross. Hal's going to come and lead us in the song that he's mentioned. And I just want to ask you, and you're following Jesus, if there's some things that, as we have an invitation song, we always have it open. If anybody needs anything from the family here, that's what this is for. So this is not just a place where you come up here and you have to be afraid of guilt and shame. This is a place, even though it looks a little strange the way we're sitting, this is like a family here. And if you've got something you need to share with the family, you need help with, you need prayers about, that's what this is. And that's what this time is for, but this invitation is always open for anything you might need from that. But if you have any need from us, if we can help you with that, help you with sin, help you with understanding baptism and giving your life to Christ, anything that we can help